This episode is brought to you by our presenting sponsor, Pizant Building Products. Pizant Building Products has been providing contractors and builders with the supplies necessary to complete their jobs since 1964. They have built a reputation of honest, helpful, and quality service, serving the HRM for the last 58 years, now with 7 locations in Nova Scotia and 1 in New Brunswick. Our team at Atlantic Construction Podcast is extremely excited to announce our new co-branded partner, Procore. Procore is the global leader in construction management software. We'll be conducting several podcast episodes with Procore users and construction companies across the country in 2023, among many other things. Stay tuned. We're excited. Okay, welcome back to the Atlantic Construction Podcast. Very excited to have today Matthew Brennan, National Director of Sales for Thermocell and Greenfiber Canada. Thermocell and Greenfiber Canada is North America's largest manufacturer of cellulose blown and insulation, and local to the Maritimes. Their facility in Debert, Nova Scotia, has been in operation since '87. So welcome aboard, Matt. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. It's a pleasure.
All ready for Christmas?
Just about.
Like
Don't tell my kid I got him
can.
some skates and a hockey stick here. He just turned 1, so we're starting.
You're getting him started early. Love it, man.
Yeah,
love it. You got your retirement plan in there, eh?
Yeah, exactly. I still have my wife's to chase down, but
yeah,
as long as he's looked after, Christmas.
Are you gonna get out to see some of the World Juniors?
I am. Yeah, I did get tickets, so
nice. We're
gonna try to check out a couple of those games.
Pretty pricey, eh?
Very pricey.
Did you buy direct or?
I did, yeah. So I won the draw, so I had the opportunity.
Oh, you won a draw, okay.
Or like the opportunity to buy, and then we bought them. You can't go to every game. But so we are selling a few of them, but we'll definitely make our way to probably 6 of the Canada games at least.
That's awesome, man. Good for you. The city's going to be buzzing. It's going to be fun downtown.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. I was talking to someone about this. Like, we're not going to see this level of hockey in the Maritimes for a really long time, I don't imagine. So it's great to see. It's great for Halifax.
Here before, years ago.
Yeah. It was like 2003, I think, was the last time.
Every 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big spectacle, and it's good for Moncton too.
Awesome. So you're a St. Mary's University graduate.
I am.
Give us a little background on your journey prior to leading up to. Hard to sum it up in a few minutes, but
yeah, I'll try to give you a quick rundown here. So I started, I guess, in the building supply industry a long time ago. So I grew up in Toronto, Nova Scotia. Worked for a company called Kingston Aluminum. Had a boss there, John Connors, probably one of the hardest men in building supplies.
Yeah.
Great guy.
Hard cat, eh?
Hard cat. And
old school, doesn't mess around.
Yeah. Serious guy. Probably when I was 14 or 15, I don't know if I was a huge fan of him, but looking back, obviously one of those great experiences to have someone like that.
Yeah.
So I worked in the building materials industry for a long time then. Obviously went to school, wasn't exactly intending to continue in this business, but we ended up coming out of school not too long after 2008. So I had taken finance and economics, and we're like, this is great. We'll all be bankers. It'll be a nice, easy life for us. And obviously,
those AAA ratings, man.
Yeah, exactly. We were way off base. So pretty quickly, when we all got out of school and none of us had jobs except for call centers, we learned that we've all got to look at different careers. And so I ended up joining a company called Solder at the time. You know them as Matree now. So they would supply interior finish products, interior doors, moldings, trim. They've got a location here in Halifax. Really great group of people there. A fellow named Renee Landry, who's now, I believe, the GM at Shaw Resources, was the fellow that hired me there. And he was a great guy. I got an opportunity to learn from him. And there's still some great people there that I worked with when I was there. Sean Mitchell was another one of my bosses there. He has East Coast Countertops here in Halifax. He owns and operates that now. Kind of when you're first starting your career, it's pretty important to have really good mentors, and had a really great opportunity with all those guys and that whole group to learn a lot, and was able to work on a large number of projects probably at a younger age than I probably should have been. And eventually took on the role there with looking after New Brunswick and then also Prince Edward Island for the company there. And then that brought me, after 4 or 5 years there, I joined Thermocell, moved back to here in Nova Scotia, and took on the position here, and have kind of just made a couple jumps since that time. So
it's been 6 years.
Yeah, a fast 6 years.
You've been national sales manager for the past?
Probably about the last 3 or so, give or take there. Yeah. So
yeah, you mentioned mentorship. Like, that's such a big thing. as a young guy, it's just kind of getting thrown to the wolves, and there's no other way to learn. Sometimes you get out of school and you've, lots of great education out there, but until you're kind of in the thick of it, and you can relate to that in business too. If you start a business, like there's no better way to learn than just like getting out there and making mistakes. But yeah, certainly being surrounded by good mentors is like, you're, like you said, sometimes like maybe you didn't like them that much at the time, but they were mature enough to not care so much about the immediate term, whether you like them or not, but just to make you better in the long run. So thank them years later.
Big time. You realize that. And it's I think the industry as a whole, like there's a lot of that, and you got to actively kind of contribute to that the best we can as we go through it and continue to fill those roles. I think labor and coaching is a big part of, what the future of this industry is going to be if we're going to maintain it. It's an awesome industry to be in, right? You've got great people across the board. So it's a fun place to be. Speaking of making mistakes, I remember when I was in university, I started a company called Rockline Painting, and my father had a painting contracting company in Ontario and Nova Scotia here for a short time. And that was a place that obviously worked really hard, started, able to put myself through school with it. But holy smokes, do you ever make a lot of mistakes when you're going through, when you're just learning on your own? You got to have a little bit of help along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And you can look back now and think like, what was I thinking on doing that and doing this? Or like, people just got to watch you make your mistakes, right? There's not much you can do. Like, just you got to learn, and then you almost have those lessons are learned. You can feel it in your bones when you're, that's not a good idea. Like, been there, done that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so give us some background on Thermocell, just specializing in, blowing in insulation, cellulose, a little bit background of the company and what it's about.
I'll do a quick history lesson here. So with Thermocell, the company started in 1987. East Coasters would probably be familiar with Kohler windows. So Peter Kohler and John Ballard started Thermocell and Kohler right about the same time. To this day, the plants are actually right next to each other, essentially in Debert here in Nova Scotia.
These are two of many plants now across North America.
Yeah, I should be clear. So we have 15 plants all across North America.
Wow.
5 of those service Canada. Next year, I think we are aiming to add 2 more to the Canada profile.
And for anybody who hasn't driven by Debert, doesn't look like there's much there. You take a drive through the woods there, and there's just a huge manufacturing plants all through. You wouldn't even know they're there.
Yeah, it's incredible. You've got Home Hardware there. You've got Sobeys. You've got Kohler. You've got us, and all with great big facilities there, right? So they've been there for a long time. They started manufacturing cellulose originally because all these municipal recycling facilities really across North America they had all this paper, and they didn't know what to do with it. And they eventually learned that cellulose was the paper fibers within the paper were really good insulating. And if you treated them with fire retardants, they were a completely safe insulation material. We've probably taken it a long way since then. Really nice too in the fact that it's hygroscopic, so it's able to actually handle moisture a little bit. So when we talk about retrofits, maybe we can talk about that later, but it's a great product for that because often you're dealing with the unknown. You don't know if you have a perfect assembly like new construction, like we often have. And so it's being able to fill that void historically really, really well.
And it's a carbon negative product, right?
Yeah, it's a carbon negative product. So one of the only ones really. So for people that are looking to spec or try to control the amount of carbon or built embodied carbon that they're using, cellulose is a great product to kind of help offset the reality that most products aren't carbon negative. And we're trying to balance essentially what's best for the environment, what's best for the building, and what's best for resiliency. And to use cellulose as an insulation product really, really helps.
Right. So is it wood fibers and paper fibers? Is that the main ingredients in the cellulose?
Exactly. So when you boil it down, it's the cellulose fiber. And if you were to think microscopically, like it's very much like a wood fiber.
Right.
And those fibers will essentially link together. That's what forms the cellulose. It's what forms the insulative properties.
Right.
So for those that don't know, cellulose is a blown-in product. So it requires a machine to blow it in. You'd find a bag at your local hardware store. You'd put the bag into the machine. It would break it up, blow through the hose, and typically about 85% of what we sell is in attics right now. We see a lot more growth into walls. That's a bit of a different assembly, or a different process, but that's cellulose essentially start to finish.
And you mean interior walls and exterior walls?
Yeah, so exactly. Yeah. So primarily the building envelope walls.
Yeah.
If you're talking interior, you're really the main reason you're doing that is for soundproofing. So cellulose, again, it's a great soundproofer as well, like on par with some of the Roxwool type products.
Yeah. What about burn time compared to some of the mineral fiber stuff? Is it?
Yeah, so it's phenomenal in terms
Wow.
of that. So the big thing when you talk about insulation, people very often talk about R value. That's what we spend most of our time talking about.
Because that's out spec'd, right? I mean,
Exactly.
most of the time that's kind of like the front piece of data you're given. So.
Yeah, and so we spec that, and there's also a bit more discussion on air tightness now, which is another component. And one other thing that we talk a little bit about is density, right? So along the spectrum, you have fiberglass, which is a very light, non-dense product. Then you would have closed cell spray foam, which would be very, very dense. And then you have cellulose, which would be obviously not as dense as spray foam, but significantly more dense than a fiberglass product, for example. It's a big part of the reason that it's much better at soundproofing than, say, fiberglass would be, but also more resistive to air and fire. So when you're talking about fire specifically, you need air to fuel that fire.
Right.
If you had a dense pack wall assembly as well as attic assembly with your cellulose, this has actually been tested in what they call the Big Burn. They actually built 3 identical houses, one with nothing, one with fiberglass, and one with cellulose, and they ignited those houses just to see what would happen in terms of burn time.
This is like a historical test.
This is a historical test. You can look it up on YouTube. Oh, I want to say it was done by...
Trivia question.
Yeah, I think it's a lab that's out in Colorado. I'll have to get the...
So it was done in a huge lab somewhere, like the houses were there.
Yep, exactly. Like you can watch it to this day.
Right.
I think it was about 45 minutes before after the fiberglass host fell, the cellulose host fell. And so, from a fireproofing perspective, a lot more peace of mind. They're both rated Class 1A fire rating materials, but just naturally that density really helps with that.
Yeah, wow. So from the birth of the company was the focus residential for a while and then eventually commercial, industrial? Like did it kind of expand into those different tiers, into those different...
Yeah, like there's been a huge evolution in terms of insulation products over the last couple of years. And really, if we're taking from 1987 until now we see just a huge acceleration in that.
Yeah.
In terms of what's demanded, in terms of, really our minimum specs. And I would probably argue that right now our minimum specs probably aren't what they should be. We need to aspire to have probably a bit higher specs in most cases. Sorry, get back to your question there.
Yeah, I was asking about residential. From the birth of the company, like what was the focus was residential at first, and then eventually, into the different markets, institutional, commercial kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So residential is probably the primary focus for sure.
And is it still the primary focus, would you say?
It's probably our highest use case.
Yeah, so it's like a big revenue stream still. And
right. We have a new product which we launched in the States, which is a 2-hour firewall, which is primarily geared towards townhouses and multi-res. That's
a cellulose filled interior assembly.
Exactly, yeah. And that's a really
that sounds neat to me as a contractor. Like I didn't even know that was possible. Maybe I'm behind the times, but I did.
Yeah.
It's a new thing though, right? Fairly new.
Very new. So
Very new.
We just launched it. Really, we started R&D on it a few years ago. We launched it about a year and a half. And really this past year was the first year. We kind of started, I think our mecca for it is Atlanta is actually where we started our first target market. And we've expanded that to a huge degree.
Okay.
The main reason for that is there was a product called shaft liner, which is what they were using there.
For shaft wall.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the 1-inch thick green board with the C-studs and elevator shafts and different things like that.
Yeah, and they were having to build that essentially floor by floor and then bringing in the shaft liner at each interjection.
Right.
And it added a lot of time to the construction.
Yeah.
And so what they were able to do with the cellulose was they were able to fill that whole cavity essentially a lot faster, improve their times. And also they weren't losing any performance. In fact, they were actually gaining a little bit. And they were able to, from an insulating contractor point of view, there was a huge shortage right now of that shaft liner product. So it's been a huge challenge. So it's really kind of helped fill that void and offer another avenue for people to go.
So for our listeners that are really keen on this and interested, and nerds like me, how does that work on site for the installation? Like, is the wall assembly kind of completed with the rough in, and then it's filled like after a certain height, and then it's completed, or is it done from the top of the wall assembly, or how does it?
It's generally done from the top of the wall assembly.
Okay.
There's with
above
this particular
above a ceiling grid or something like that, where there's room to.
Right. With this particular assembly, like, it's very regional specific, right? So we have different municipalities and different building codes. So
Right.
we really have to work and make sure that everything is lined up.
You gotta navigate that. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that's the one thing about that product that's perhaps a little bit more challenging, is there's much more communication required. But once that's done and looked after, like, it is an approved wall assembly. We've gotten all the approvals for it. It's just really managing the different municipal rules and regulations, which we kind of see. So it's tough to talk about it on a broad scale.
Right. Are you excited and see like that being used a lot in lieu of shaft liner, or like that kind of method catching on a lot? Because it's new, right? So it could really take off. You can see it more.
It's been a tremendous, where it's been successful, or where we focused in those markets, it's been tremendously successful.
What markets would those be? In the States?
Primarily in the States. So we haven't launched it at all in Canada yet.
Okay.
So really, I was just on a call a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking about, okay, what do we need to do to align this here in Canada? But right now, I think the focus has been the Phoenix market, which is one of the fastest growing markets in the States right now.
For construction.
Atlanta, which is another very rapidly growing one. And I think in around DC area as well is where we've been focusing that, and they've made a ton of progress on that in the course of the last couple of years.
So what's the entry point there when you have a new product like that, a new installation method? Like, are you approaching, like, from the vision wise, like, are you approaching building codes? Are you approaching, like, is it architects to spec it? Are you talking to contractors and you're educating them on how to install? Or is it all three? Is it more than that? It's like a big undertaking, right?
It's all three for that one.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest undertaking right now in terms of involvement. The other areas that we would get involved would be passive house, net zero.
Sure.
Often with those, you're dealing with an engineer and architect.
Yeah.
And actually, it's excellent in those cases because they're often a lot more prepared than a lot of people that we would deal with. Sometimes it's just the homeowner,
just the client,
and so they have
who might not be educated on why this is better. Or what's
exactly, and so we're really walking them through the process, start to end, to explain, okay, this is what you need to do, this is what your targets are, and we're working on that right now and trying to educate our own staff. Like, for example, this year I'll be getting my passive house consultant course and designation done to be able to assist better.
Right.
I think in Canada here, like, it's very important to have your credentials and kind of look after those things. So we've been working away on those sorts of things, and we've worked with here in Halifax. There's a Habitat, Lori Rand. There's another interesting project going on called it's a panelization project run by Nick Rudnicki. Essentially, Recover is the name of the initiative.
Okay.
And that's a whole concept which is trying to tackle the problem of retrofit. So essentially what they're trying to do, or piloting with the support of the government here, is actually to have a bolt-on wall system, essentially. So you're taking a house and you're adding another envelope onto it, in essence, right?
Yeah, it's just like putting on a jacket.
Exactly. And so with that...
A jacket that you can wear all year round.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they're fastening that with some pretty heavy duty fasteners. And I think they're working through that. I think they have their first pilot coming up, which was a pretty big success for them and for that project. And then we also have your typical retrofit, which would be, what your typical homeowner would do or call a contractor for, where they're blowing in the walls from the outside.
Right.
We have a lot of old housing stock in the Maritimes. And so it's a really big problem. I think 30% of our used carbon is contributed from our buildings, particularly our older buildings.
Yes.
So if we're ever going to tackle that, it's a pretty big leap we have to make.
Yeah.
And so using a product like cellulose in those wall cavities and also in the attics is a huge contributor.
What about some details on why it's better to use cellulose on these retrofits? Is it because of the existing moisture? Is it be like, what are some of the variables that make it better product to use?
The big thing with any retrofit job or renovation style job is the unknown, right?
Yeah.
So new construction, we have the luxury
for cost-wise and for everything else.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. Your costs can expand really quick in those types of projects. And with cellulose, it's very forgiving, like I say, right? So if you do have a small leak, like we have
as far as it's functioning once it's installed.
Yeah, exactly, right? So pretty resistant to water where it has that hygroscopic component. You can put it in a lot of different assemblies. You do always want to be mindful and have the discussion or at least have an idea about where your vapor barriers lie within a wall cavity when you're putting it in the wall. Mm-hmm. But as a general rule, cellulose is quite favored for the retrofit market. Yeah.
Right. And so for our listeners, just on a basic standpoint, like cellulose is what you're going to see blown in attics and residential. I mean, that's where you're going to see it. But now it's also just kind of slowly becoming, it's used on the full envelope sometimes. What about exterior walls? Like, how's it applied there? And is it
so exterior, like specifically to the exterior side, we're not reusing cellulose.
Right. Okay.
It's going to be on the interior side. So you always want to have some kind of a water barrier that's going to protect.
What about between floors? Is it ever used there?
Big time. So soundproofing, right? So
right, because of the sound rating.
Yeah. So a typical wall assembly, so it's an SDC of 54. Obviously, you get a thicker wall that expands.
Right.
But that's quite good when you compare that against products like the Rockwool products,
like
for
mineral
example.
fiber stuff. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the burn time you were talking about earlier too is really, really good.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. And so when you look at the install cost too, right now, especially now, some of the price increases, and we've certainly haven't been immune to this either. Our product has increased in price, but it is something that's pretty accessible to a lot of people. People are able to use our product. It's not going to absolutely break the bank by any stretch, and it's going to provide a lot of benefits. It's kind of one of those products that punches above its weight class in terms of its cost versus the value that you're getting out of it, especially when you compare it to products like spray foam, for example, which is a very highly costly product. There are some inherent issues that sometimes come with spray foam, is it's often, essentially it's manufactured on site.
Yeah. Isn't there weather pending, conditions that, allow for that whereas there might not be for your product?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I've gone through the spray foam training myself, and there's a lot of ways to mess it up. And when we're talking about spray foam, there's a lot of variables you're considering. You're considering your substrate temperature, you're considering the exterior air temperature, considering your product and how old it is, for example. All of those things you're considering, and you are taking those into adjustment when you set your variables on that machine and essentially manufacture it on site.
Yeah.
So if you're not very dialed in, for the most part, I will say the installers and contractors in the Maritimes are quite good. We don't see this as much of an issue as in some of the larger markets where there might be a bit more running and gunning going on.
Yeah.
But as a general rule, like, our product is made, it's at our plant. There's no manufacturing on site, so it is ready to go on site. There's no real concerns there.
What about like integration? Like, you're training a lot of the contractors maybe who want to start to use these methods and use your products, providing that. But like, what about, like, is there specific machines used for blown in that are specific to Thermocell and Greenfiber Canada, or can you just use anything, or is it kind of either or?
There's an education component there. Typically, for the average person who's using our product, it's probably getting it from a building supply center, and we would stock all the building supply centers with insulation blowing machines. A contractor would have varying degrees of machines, some small, some large. And there's some settings and things like that we'll teach them to. We actually have techs all across North America that will come actually set that up.
Wow.
And we're in the process now of setting up a training center here in Atlantic Canada, which would really help the contractors here and give them a leg up in terms of particularly these wall systems and understanding exactly what it is that they're looking to do. We have a system actually called the EnviroShield wall system, and that's a CCMC approved wall system where you're dense packing cellulose. The big difference that we have to teach contractors or anyone that's going to do a wall system is it's different than an attic. With cellulose, typically you're dealing with 2, maybe 3 installation methods. In Canada, you have loose fill, which is the easiest of them all. We can all do this.
Right.
You just go up to your attic and you hold the hose and you let the product
go.
come out, and that's it.
It's like taking a whiz.
Pretty much. And essentially, you're just going to your desired height, and you're stopping, and you can call it a day.
Yeah.
We're probably oversimplifying that a little bit. There are some details you want to have in preparation, but as a general rule, it's quite easy.
Yeah.
In your wall systems, the big things we want to avoid is settling. So in an attic system, you're blowing air and you're blowing cellulose. Eventually that air is going to dissipate and the product's going to drop down a little bit. And because it's a denser, heavier product than, say, fiberglass, it will naturally settle more. It is designed to do that. That's probably a common misconception. A lot of people will say, I put 20 inches in and now I have 18 inches. I must have lost 10%.
Right.
Yeah. And they didn't lose anything. That's completely exactly what is supposed to happen in design.
I hear a lot of conversations going on the job site where it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Everybody arguing over that.
Yeah. Everyone panics a little bit because they think they lost something. But at the end of the day, No, that's exactly what it's supposed to do.
Okay.
It's designed to do.
Yeah.
And we have to test that through CCMC every year.
Right.
And through different organizations, we have to get that validated. Now, in the situation of a wall, the last thing you want is settling. You want a uniform cavity throughout. And so what we do is we train people to essentially put the right amount of material in the wall so that product becomes dense. So really, if you were to scoop out that product, so just to walk you through it a little bit, the common practice would be to put a mesh or a smart membrane over your stud wall on the interior side.
Okay.
This is for new construction.
Yeah.
You would essentially staple it to your studs. This is after all your electrical and mechanical is
And
all
that's
in.
going to hold that.
Exactly. It's going to hold it. If you're, I understand you come from a family of drywallers, so you probably would recommend that we strap this first.
Yeah,
so
let's
that you
do
have
that.
so that you have a nice clean finish. You can
So the foreman doesn't get pissed off.
Exactly. And so you can do it that way. And for anyone doing it the first time, that's probably what I would recommend.
Yeah.
As people become more professional with this, they're able to get away with it without the strapping. And so they're able to insert their blowing hose into that behind that mesh and allow that material to get denser and denser and denser until it reaches the desired density where it will not settle. You have a completely uniform cavity. You'll fill every void, get behind every wire. Every
Is there a set time? Like I was thinking of concrete. Like, is it 48 hours of working the sets and?
Yeah, there's no like if you're dense packing, by the time you pull the hose out, like it's set, right?
Yeah, okay.
You're okay. Go. Yeah, exactly. So in your attic, it definitely will take some time. Like next day, it's not going to be dropped to 2 inches.
That's right. But you're not in a 6-inch wall cavity there. It's a little bit of a wider space.
Exactly.
More air and movement and stuff. From a building science standpoint, I'm thinking like pull tests and roof testing and all that kind of stuff for moisture. Is there on-site testing for this product that you do? To collect data and whatnot. It's heavy on the building science side, right? For sure.
Yeah, like it can be. Like we try to simplify it the best we can. Generally, what we'll tell installers to do is essentially track their bags. Like they're really fundamentally what we're asking people to do is that the design settle density is 3.5 pounds of product per cubic foot. So we have a chart that helps you with that, or you can reach out to us and we'll help you with it.
Right.
But at that point, it won't settle. And so we'll generally tell people, say, okay, take a 10-foot section of wall, mark on the wall, we should have 6 bags done and blown at this point.
Right.
And so that's just a check and balance where you really can't screw it up. That's the simplest way that we've kind of been able to achieve that. Is just break it up into pieces and go on. Now, if you're doing a passive host, for example, there's definitely some accreditation that we have to go through, and those wall assemblies are tested. And they're tested for density. They'll do core samples. That's a little bit different.
Okay.
And so in that case, what they'll do is they'll essentially take a core sample, they'll weigh what's in there and just make sure that that's the right weight or the
take
right,
a whole
right
section
density.
of the wall and
Exactly. Yeah. So that's generally the validation process there for passive hosts. There's a couple different ones depending on which organization you go through.
So you got two locations in Debert. What square footage are these plants that are there?
Oh, it's a good question. I don't know what our total square footage is across the board. I don't know. I'd have to follow up. I mean, we're capable of producing about, on an absolute max, probably about 150,000 bags per month.
Right, and
that plant.
What's produced at the Debert plant, that's for Atlantic Canada, or is it going other?
That's for Atlantic Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got 200 or 300 employees as the national sales leader. Yourself throughout the country. How are things specifically in Atlantic Canada right now? What's the kind of layout for the company here? Like couple in each province? Is it much more than that? Like how are sales right now here local to Atlantic?
So sales are really strong here in Atlantic Canada. For the most part, like we're in the middle of a boom, and on top of that, we have all of these added programs right now in terms of insulation and building envelope, and so. It's really actually tough. We talk about this frequently about forecasting. We obviously recognize that a lot of people are projecting there's going to be some kind of a pullback. We haven't really seen much of that yet. So there's
got lots of high interest rates. Material pricing's up, but nothing's slowing down.
And the housing stock is still way down, right? And that's the thing that it's tough to gauge, right? I think I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks about this and say, what are we going to see?
Yeah.
Generally in Atlantic Canada, we don't see the big dips and dives as the other parts of the country.
Kind of benign to the big ones.
Yeah, exactly. And right now it seems to be that's the case. And when we look at sales across Atlantic Canada, there's it's incredibly strong. One of the biggest challenges we've had is trying to manage through COVID and through the pandemic that demand.
Logistically, what and stuff, yeah.
Logistically, and we do also ship into Quebec out of our plant here in the Maritimes as well. So we've used some of our other plants to assist and offload that and allow a little bit more capability here for the Maritimes.
Right.
We've built higher levels of stock going into the fall season, which is primarily the primary insulation season.
Right.
That's when most people typically think.
That's when they want to be working on those envelopes, right? Yeah. Before it gets the cold weather hits.
Exactly. New construction's kind of wrapping up at that point, or at least they're closing in. And then your typical homeowner saying, okay, I paid a lot in power last year. What can we do about this?
Right.
And on top of that, we have all of these programs right now that are taking place, whether it's for low income, medium income households. Upgrading the building envelope is pretty crucial right now, especially given what we're seeing with power prices.
Yeah. So what about a little more on passive house and net zero? What's the term sanctuary home?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
So I'll back up for a second. So Thermocell, we're actually in the process of a great big brand change, right? So I mentioned we have all these plants south of the border. In 2015, Greenfiber actually had purchased Thermocell, but we had never really formally merged until now. Mm-hmm. And so we have this great opportunity now where Greenfiber has been doing a lot of the legwork essentially for us here in Canada. And so where we're merging and creating those brands, we're going to have a lot of more access to all of those assets and things like that have been already created through Greenfiber. And so when we talk about Sanctuary was a new product actually that we launched about 2 years ago in the US. So actually, I believe it was the runner-up for the most sustainable product with Home Depot, I think last year, in terms of new product entries that they had into their stores. So the Sanctuary bag is essentially a rebranding of the bag that we have here in the Maritimes, which is the ThermoShield bag. That's what most people would know our product as here in Atlantic Canada.
Right.
So this bag is geared a lot more towards the end consumer, right? So we've often focused on the pro consumer for a really long time here in Canada.
As in the contractor, or the GC, or the builder.
Exactly. Yeah. And not that we've left out the end consumer, but we haven't really geared what our focus has been or our message has been to them. I think part of that is there's been a huge shift in the last couple of years of what the consumer actually wants. For years, we've had this great green product that performs really, really well. It's carbon negative, like we talked about earlier. But that message, if we rewind 10 years, really kind of fell on deaf ears, unfortunately, right? Like it wasn't a huge motivator for people to purchase, or there wasn't as much concern about the environment. We didn't really feel that connection that we do now.
So that's proof then, if this is working for a company the size of Thermocell, that the client, as in the home builder, the homeowner, is conscious enough about net zero and about the products that you don't need to educate them, and they're going to go with your products because of those for those reasons. Without, there might not be an architect involved leaning them toward that. Yeah, that's a good sign then.
It's a huge change. Like it's a complete sea change, right? Like we would talk. I remember going into meetings even in 2015 and talking about this, and people would say, they just don't care. And right or wrong, that's really what I would have assumed.
Yeah, might still be the case.
Yeah, and now we're seeing this change. Like we just done a survey, is 83% of people, if given the option to buy something that's environmentally conscious versus something that's not, they're going to choose the environmentally conscious product. And so that's a huge, huge change in the market. And that was a North American-wide study. That wasn't just Canada, who might even skew a little bit more concerned.
That's really good news then.
Yeah, so it's a huge, huge change. And there's a lot of just people want to support good business that are doing good things and contributing positively to the built world that we create.
Yeah.
And that's really what we're trying to do. When we think about your question, getting back to your question about a sanctuary home and what is that, we've launched actually a number of products that kind of go, not products, but really concepts that kind of support this, right? So a sanctuary home in essence is a product that has used cellulose in its walls and attic. It's a very soundproof. It's a home that's going to be very, very comfortable for anyone to live in. And it's going to be a very healthy home is kind of the goal, right? So we don't contribute to all of that. We just focus on the envelope, but with proper air exchanging. I think you had I forget his name, but was it the Conscious Builder?
We did have Casey from the Conscious Builder, who's
Right.
located in Ottawa, who's a net zero builder.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was talking a little bit about that whole home wellness concept, which was
Yes.
really cool. And it really aligned with what our product essentially is, right? It's contributing to that, a nice, comfortable sanctuary to come into. It's where you have your cellulose in your wall. Essentially, you have a soundproof home, very, very comfortable place to be.
Right.
And also very, very efficient, right? From an air change per hour as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. Just like one of the other things that we have there is we also have the Sanctuary Builder program and the Sanctuary Contractor program.
Under your brand.
Yeah, all under that brand. So we're trying to essentially encapsulate everyone. So if you're someone that's wants that, you can reach out to a Sanctuary Builder, which is a program we'll just be launching this year. And that will be a program that we launch to all builders. Essentially, if you are building a show home, for example, we'll donate product for that show home to basically have cellulose in your walls and your attic for that home at no cost. Obviously, with the ability, giving them the ability to essentially sell the consumer that, hey, this is a product that we could we could put in your home. It could add a lot of value for you.
Sure.
And then also on the Sanctuary Trusted Contractor side, that essentially is going to be someone that's been fully trained on how to build a sanctuary home, how to install a wall job correctly.
That's really interesting stuff. Just competition wise, like maybe we could focus on Atlantic Canada. Like obviously in a way you're competing with, the Roxul's or the other fiberglass products where people are going to choose bad as opposed to this, or it depends on what's spec'd or if you have an entry point or not. But like, as far as a direct competitor with cellulose, how many, what's that like as far as the competition wise for the same type of method, same type of product?
Yeah. I mean, really there's three, I guess you would say, right? So you have fiberglass, all the fiberglass manufacturers out there. You'd have spray foam to a lesser extent. We talked a little bit about that earlier.
Well, these are different installations in lieu of your style, but like not necessarily any other cellulose manufacturers that you're directly competing with.
Right. Here in the Maritimes, we kind of own the Maritimes for the most part.
Yeah, in that regard.
Yeah. So Suprema has a plant in Quebec, and that's predominantly where they live.
That's their closest location.
Yeah, and so they will dip in a little bit to the Maritimes, but relatively rarely.
Yeah.
Historically speaking, too, with cellulose manufacturers, they've always been small, right? So there's always been a lot of them. They've always been hyper regional.
Right.
And so from a perspective of competition, it's been really challenging for them to organize. And over the last couple of years, Greenfiber has been able to merge really over the last 15 years or so, kind of been able to scoop up a lot of those. And now we have a bit more of a cohesive message, which really, really helps, because for years, really, everything was pocketed, and it was hard to have a cohesive message against some of these massive multinationals like Owens Corning, for example.
Yeah.
And so the message was essentially lost, right? It was a niche product that was really, really well accepted within the building science community and the efficiency product community,
right,
because they were seeing the results, right? So they were testing these assemblies.
But all the manufacturers were kind of local, smaller outfits. So you, as Thermocell Greenfiber Canada, you kind of have a niche, a unique position in that regard. Then, as a North American, it's a good spot to be in. Yeah,
it's a really good outlook too. Like going into the future now, and there's a lot of builders have this problem to solve. Is net zero is the goal, generally by 2030, depending on each region and their codes. And that's a huge step. And one of the things that we're trying to do is educate as many installers as possible on how to get there. And so really everyone has to be involved in that. I think you've had some HRV people on there too, on the podcast as well, or ERV people. And all of these systems, essentially, they tie together.
Yeah. They tie together for that full net zero package, right? There's so many elements and so much change happening right now, I feel.
Yeah, it's a huge change. Like
we're in a big shift here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So the future is really, really positive. I think there's a lot of ways to get there. Cellulose is probably going to have a very big role in that, mainly, like I say, because it's accessible. Most people can get in there. It's not cost prohibitive like, say, a spray foam is. And so it's a product for everyone that's ultimately going to drive our carbon down.
Yeah.
And you're going to also see a huge benefit in your efficiency.
Right. Do you see there being opportunity to have some methods incorporated in like some large commercial envelope projects, like on the commercial side, in lieu of like outboard insulation, maybe like your cavity rocks and comfort bats from rock. Is there opportunity there too for?
There's opportunity. Like one of the big markets for us too, we very rarely talk about this one, but it's actually agriculture, and then also soundproofing. So soundproofing is the main one when you're talking about commercial. You can put cellulose in a sound floor, you can blow that in. It's going to do a phenomenal job.
Okay.
Or a sound wall. If you're talking about agriculture, which is another kind of broad scale industry for us,
with a certain method of envelope, like whether it's a Butler style kind of barn building or, right?
Yeah, typically like we'll see it in a lot of barns. So chicken farms, for example, here in the Maritimes, like down in the valley,
Sure.
potato farms in Prince Edward Island and also northern New Brunswick.
Yeah.
Cellulose is pretty desirable for those ones. The fire retardant chemical that we use in our product is borate or boric acid. And so it's very benign to humans, causes no issues for us. But naturally, animals and pests really don't like it. And so from an agriculture environment, that really matters.
Keeps the rats out of the walls.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, right? You don't want those critters in around your potatoes. You don't want them around your chickens, and it really hurts productivity. And they've even gone as far to measure that, and they've kind of said and come back to us and said, look, we seem to get better results when we use cellulose than fiberglass in these builds.
So how many employees work with you here in Atlantic Canada, like under Thermocell?
Yeah, so we're pretty fortunate here in Atlantic Canada. Like I mentioned the company started in 1987. Actually, we have one of our employees is actually still here from 1987.
From inception, yeah.
Exactly. And then we have a plant manager that's been around here since the mid 90s as well, the early 2000s. So we've got a lot of experience here in Atlantic Canada. And then we have a great crew of workers and production workers at the plant there as well. We run essentially 7 days a week now, due to the increased demand. We used to only run 5, and now we're really just looking for ways to absolutely maximize our capacity and
to keep up
our
with
output.
the market, right?
Yeah, and fortunately, like we have some really, really good people, like I mentioned, that have been there for years, and without them, I don't think we'd be able to do what we're doing today, because it is a real challenge if you talk around the industry, and
those people would be hard to replace, I imagine.
They certainly would.
Everybody that has that experience is hard to replace, but just to find the expertise and the niche and kind of pretty particular skill set and experience.
Yeah, we could talk about that forever, because I think that's a pretty big issue industry wide, right?
Absolutely.
Is try to
labor shortage, skilled
people.
Workers. Yeah.
Yeah, I was at a conference not too long ago with the ABSDA. Familiar with the Atlantic Building Supply Dealers Association?
Okay.
They've been partners with primarily the dealers, so the Home Hardwares, the Timber, the Castles of the world. And they had someone in to speak to us all essentially on immigration and bringing additional workers in from foreign countries to meet some of these needs. And they had shared a couple different success stories, but you look around that room, everyone was talking about, the challenges that they all have. And it's something that we've got to work on in the future for sure.
Do you guys have any creative ways of, looking at maybe immigration, different things like that, like for future plans? And
I think going to that conference definitely opened our eyes to maybe that as a possibility, especially for skilled, qualified workers that may have experience, whether that's from Europe or abroad or other countries. There was some really interesting success stories they shared with some Ukrainians that were brought over. There was a Home Hardware, particularly in New Brunswick and Grand Manan, actually, who was really struggling with workers, and they had brought some people in and kind of shared just how successful it was and how big of an impact it had on the community. So after hearing those stories, it's something that I think as manufacturers and employers, we have to look at those sorts of things as options and eyes wide open, recognize that they very well could be a part of the plans moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a recent guest, 2 individuals, and one was from Poland, one was from Ukraine. Just seeing a lot of Ukrainians here just in personal life, out at having dinner and stuff at the different places downtown. And it's lots of people moving here, and stories, success stories and neat stories of whether it's apprenticeship labor workers on site or working in a plant, and a lot of them, the cultural background, their work ethic is amazing.
That's often the feedback.
Yeah,
is that
sometimes the language barrier can be an issue, which is presumable, right? Like certain language barriers and and they're taking courses to enhance their English. But man, some of them learn really fast.
Yeah. And I think too, like it's important to recognize that we have really great homegrown talent as well. Like you have people going to trade school, and we've got to be able to connect with those, and we got to bring those guys in, and we want to try to keep those folks home if we can, and develop them and bring them into the fold, and those are all things we'd be looking at as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about, you know, one of the spin-offs that we hope that is part of, you know, what we're trying to accomplish with our media platform is just to shed light on a lot of those younger people and students that might choose NSCC or, you know, or different courses like within the construction industry, as opposed to, you know, accounting or lots of different, you know, bachelor's degrees and different paths that you might take in university. That this is a great industry, and try and fill that gap, you know, because it's going to be gaps, and things will be busy, and so hopefully we can we can contribute to that in our little small way. But
yeah, there's a lot of support, I think, given too. Like if you are able to catch on with a manufacturer here in Atlantic Canada, or even a building supply deal, or like I think there's a lot of avenues that people can take, and those are all really good jobs that people don't necessarily recognize or think to or aspire to, and people really need to give things like that a thought.
Yeah, good paying jobs, good benefits, good people. Yeah. Anything else that we didn't touch on? I'm sure, you know, we could open up many different topics. Often, you know, we could sit here for hours and hours. I'm sure you have places to be here on Friday afternoon, but
yeah, well, I mean, we've all got to get our Christmas shopping done.
That's
here.
right.
But, no, I think that was a good talk. It was a pleasure to be on with you for sure.
Yeah, man. No, it was a real treat, and yeah, we'll look forward to this dropping, and it'll be probably sometime. Today's the 16th, so it'll probably be, you know, a couple weeks into the new year. But yeah, it's very, very exciting to sit and hear about great company, and congrats to you on your journey, and 6 years in national director of sales. I'm sure the stress can get to you here and there, but hopefully you get a break at Christmas time here. Get up to some of the games, like you said.
Yeah, we'll try to. Hopefully Canada get some W's. So.
Yeah, awesome, man. All right, cheers. Cheers,
okay.
Matt.
Cheers, thank you.
Cheers. This episode is brought to you by Cook Insurance, your trusted insurance broker in Atlantic Canada for 50 years. Insurance is complex, and the Cook team focuses on delivering comprehensive solutions for your construction needs, including builder's risk, wrap-up liability, performance bonds, and project-specific construction. A Navicord partner since 2020, Cook is one of the largest construction brokers in Canada and offers national strength with a local touch. Whatever your insurance needs are, Cook has you covered. We would like to take this time to thank a longtime sponsor of our media platform, FCA Surety. The brokers at FCA Surety are experts in all surety bonding categories and provide unparalleled service during the bonding process.